We are in Judges chapter 19. Judges chapter 19. In Judges, we have always talked about the cycle. The cycle. And the cycle is the Israelites go into this thing where they get delivered, and they start doing evil. God sends them a judge. The judge helps them out of that, raises up a judge, and then they go back through that cycle again. And if you remember back to like the very first lesson, one of the things we talked about was the fact that there is not, you can't get scholars to agree on many things, but every one of them agrees with this cycle thing, okay? Every one of them. And if you remember back when we very first started, what I said at that time was the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats until it gets toward the very end, and then it kind of goes, okay? And today we saw a little bit of that last week when Brother Josh talked about Dan. Dan was supposed to be up here, and now Dan moved down here because they didn't like their territory. They didn't want to have to fight those people up there. There's an expression that we see in the Old Testament, and it's from Dan to Beersheba. And that expression comes from the fact that Dan was up here and Beersheba was down there. It's like flip that. And the idea behind it is it's from the very bottom to the very top. I'm covering everything. I don't know Michigan well enough, so I don't know how to express it in Michigan terms. In Texas, you would say all the way from Galveston to Amarillo, okay? The UP to the Great Bay. There we go. But that's just a little small. Anyway, whatever. You get the point. It goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And we saw a little bit of that last week where they just kind of started going off the rails a little bit. And if you've ever been in a wreck, if you've ever been in a car wreck or anything like that, then you know that sometimes, and we experience this in Michigan when we start sliding around on the ice. And once you start sliding around, there's just not a whole lot you can do about it. And you just got to go where the car takes you. There's a certain gravity. There's a certain momentum. And then you stop abruptly. But there's a certain momentum. And what happens here, what happened in the last chapter, and what happens here is started that momentum. We saw it in the last chapter with Dan and all that stuff that went on, and now we're going to see it again in this chapter. And this chapter is going to lead us to the next two chapters where there's a momentum taking place, and it just carries it on, and there's not a whole lot that can be stopped about it. So, this particular chapter comes with a caution. Inside this chapter, there are terrible things that are done by terrible people and graphic situations. This is not one that we're going to tell our little children about. We're not going to get the little flannel boards up and show them, this particular story, okay? It's just not. Because there's some stuff that goes on here that shocks us. And it should have shocked them. So again, Judges takes place between 1450 and about 1000 BC. And the story recorded here, we don't know when that particular period was, the specific dates for that particular period. There are some people involved here. There's a father-in-law. He's a hospitable person, but he may be looking out for his best interest. There's a Levite. There's a man from the tribe of Levi who takes a concubine. There's a concubine in the story. The concubine of the aforementioned Levite, she was originally from Bethlehem in Judah. Now, let's talk about what a concubine was. A concubine was very similar to a wife. Very, very similar to a wife. In fact, the father-in-law is called the father-in-law because the concubine has basically all the rights that the wife does. And then there's these men of Gibeah, and they are wicked men who try to do immoral things to the visitors of the city, and we'll get into that. Now again, chapter 19 sets the stage for chapters 20 and 21. And as we read this, it's hard not to see this as an analogy of the relationship of God and the Israelites. As I was reading this, all I could think about as I was reading this, and we're gonna talk about this at the end of the class, but all I could think about was this. It sounds like this is God's way of trying to show the people how desperately far they have traveled away from Him. They've fallen. These are people that don't know who God is. These people don't know the character of God. They don't know much. And because they don't, they just do kind of whatever they want. So there's 5 sections. Verse 1 through 9 is the reconciliation between Levite and the concubine. 10 through 15 is the arrival of Levite's entourage at Gibeah. 16 through 21 is the hospitality of the man from Ephraim. 22 through 26 of the assault at Gibeah. And in the last couple verses, the call of the Levite for vengeance. Normally, the way that I do classes is I'll read the class and then we'll go back verse by verse. That's how I've been doing things for these many years, okay? I'm not going to do that today. We're going to read the verse and then I'm going to comment on the particular section, okay? So I'm not going to do a verse by verse comment because I kind of want you to get, as we're going to look at the section as a whole, and I kind of want to get the idea of the section as a whole and take a look at that. So let's do that. Judges 19, starting in verse 1. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, pardon me, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah, but his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So he brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So he ate and drank and lodged there. Then it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. Verse 6, so they sat down, and the 2 of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. Verse 7, and when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, but the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. Verse 9, and when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine, his servant, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow, you go your way early, so that you may get home. We start this section with the phrase we've heard before. There is no king in Israel. And there was no king, but there was a king. God was their king. God was their king. But they didn't recognize that. They didn't recognize God as their king. They didn't recognize his authority over them. Because that's what a king does. He has authority over them. And while chapters 17 and 18 emphasize idolatry, 19, 20, and 21 show the sheer anarchy and injustice that was going on. Notice the concubine goes off and plays the harlot. She was unfaithful to the Levite. Then the Levite travels and reconciles with her. And then the father-in-law begs him to stay day after day. Do you see, if you put yourself in and looking at it from our perspective, can you see how God is the father-in-law? God, first of all, is the Levite who goes off and chases after this concubine who's over here playing the harlot. Who's the harlot? Who's the concubine acting like? The Jewish people, the Israelites. And so the Levite is chasing after her, running her down and saying, hey, you need to come on back with me and everything will be great and fine and wonderful and awesome.
But the funny thing is, I think the father Satan himself trying to keep God in there.
Well, I'm looking at it a different way. So that they get back. And please don't get me wrong when I say that the analogy here, it shifts a little bit. Because the father-in-law then says, stay here with me. While they're here, everything is fine, everything is safe, everything is good. But the Levite wants to go. He wants to leave. He wants to go back to his house. He wants to take his concubine. He wants to go back home, and they want to go back and do whatever they want to do. But what appeared interesting to me, at least, was the fact that here was a Levite. Now, Levite was supposed to be what? The representative of God. And the Levites, remember, didn't have any land, so they could go and they were supposed to do God's work in wherever they were at. And that's what the Levite was supposed to be doing. But he's got to spend his time running around and getting his concubine who's over here playing the harlot. Just as the Israelites have been doing with all these other false gods running around. Let's look at verse 10. However, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he arose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of Jebus, into this city of Jebusites, and lodge in it. But the master said to him, we will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners, who are not of the children of Israel. We will go to Gibeah. So he said to his servant, come, let us draw near into these places, and spend the night in Gibeah and Ramah. And they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. Now, here's a map, and you can't see that map, but anyway, that's terrible. I'm terrible at this. Look at it. Y'all go to the back of your Bibles and look in the map back there, okay? So, it's over there, it's over here. Okay, there's Gibeah right there, okay? The point he's making to the story, they want to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in Dan. It's supposed to be an Israelite stronghold. And yet it's not an Israelite stronghold. And why is it not an Israelite stronghold? Because they don't know God. He goes there. He goes there with 2 donkeys. Look what he's got. 2 donkeys, a concubine and a servant. And he travels 6 miles to Jebus or Jerusalem, named for an Amorite group. So they have to go 4 more miles. Now look, I got to thinking about this because 6 miles, like, that's nothing. He's got 2 donkeys, a concubine, and a servant. Listen, there weren't any highways at that time. There was some well-traveled paths, and a lot of desert. And everything they had with them was either on their back or on their donkey. It wasn't like it was, I'm going to walk. I just recently got an electronic bike, and I rode it around my neighborhood the other day. It's awesome. It's great. okay? And somebody, when I told a couple people that, they said, well, you're going to ride it to the church building? That's 15 miles. I may eventually. I'm not going to do it my first day, you know?
You got turns at that.
Yeah. And so we got to don't get this weird mindset. You know, when they took donkeys and whatnot, they had to go. They had to plan for their lodging. They had to plan for their food. They had to plan for water. All that stuff had to be planned out. So notice in verse 13, the reason that they went to Gibeah was because they didn't want to go to where the foreigners were. Should have there been foreigners in Jerusalem? No, there shouldn't have been foreigners there. And there shouldn't have been foreigners there because they were supposed to run everybody out. And they hadn't done that. They hadn't followed God's instructions. And because they hadn't followed God's instructions, foreigners had taken over. And because the reason they went ahead to Gibeah because they were Jewish and they expected to receive hospitality. And that hospitality goes all the way back to the days of Moses coming out of Egypt when he said, you were foreigners, you were sojourners. Verse 16, just then an old man came in from his work at the field of the evening, who was also from the mountains of Ephraim. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going? And where do you come from? Verse 18, so he said to them, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I'm going to the house of the Lord, for there is no one who will take me into the house, although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, for your female servant, and for our young man who is with your servant. There is no lacking of anything. Hang on a second, verse 18. Where are we at? That's verse 19. Let's look at verse 20. And the old man said, peace with thee, howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. So he brought him into the house. Where are we at? Okay. And gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet and did not eat and drink. Now, okay, there we go. There's verse 20. Okay. And they went inside to spend the night. Now, at the last minute, they were saved from danger, if you will, in the city square. The old man comes out and says, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Where are you from? Where are you going? The Levite wants to get back up to, basically he wants to go to Shiloh so he can worship God. And the travelers said, listen, we got everything we need. I've got food, I got water, I got all the stuff I need for the donkeys. I got everybody provisioned for. I just need a place to stay. And once again, someone in the story saved people from danger. Look at verse 22. As they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage. Look, here is my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Humble them and do with them as you please. But to this man, do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. And then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. It's hard for us to read that particular section without thinking of Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you thought of Sodom and Gomorrah, you wouldn't be alone in doing that. There is no doubt what they had on their mind. They said, bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally.
And they wanted to kill him.
Well, that was not their necessary intention. Their intention was to know him carnally. That was their intention. No doubt about it. Now, their reaction to that rubs us the wrong way. I don't want to send my daughter or my wife out there to these people. That sounds just like a bad plan. That's just bad, all the way around. Later on, he's going to say that he felt like he was about to die. They felt that he was going to die. They offered his concubine and the virgin daughter. And eventually the concubine was sent out, and she was abused all night. There are no heroes in this story. There are no heroes in this story. But when you get rid of God, and you get rid of God's laws, and you don't pay attention to his rules, and you don't pay attention to him or what he wants, what you are left with is chaos and lawlessness. What you are left with is a bunch of bad decisions. At dawn, she fell at the door. Now, commentators, especially about this next part, are divided on whether she was alive or dead at this point when she got back to the door. Well, she had been a harlot before. It doesn't matter. She was still a person. Verse 27. When the master arose and opened the doors of his house and went out to his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up and let's be going. And there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. When he entered the house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, no deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. Again, among the commentators, there's no agreement on if the concubine was dead or alive. When he said to her, get up, there's a good chance he might have thought that she was alive. But either way, what he does next is pretty horrific, to say the least. I can't imagine cutting somebody up, and I can't. That's something. Disgusting is the word, yes. And in some commentaries, they say he treated her like a priest offering a sacrifice, like he was dividing up one of the sacrificial animals. And look what he does here. He sends pieces of her to each of the 12 tribes. His actions are trying to arouse the nation to say, look how far we have gone. Judges 19 asks the question, how far is enough? How far is enough? A little bit of sin, we can tolerate. A little bit more sin, we can tolerate. You know that old story about how you boil a frog? You put him in a thing of water, and you turn the heat up real slowly. And he'll sit there, having full ability to jump out of the water, and he'll sit there and boil to death. That's terrible. And this is what has happened to the Israelites. What has happened to the Israelites is sin has slowly progressed. And sometimes they've rushed toward it, and sometimes they've held back. God sent judges to hold them back, and yet they've allowed the water to boil. And it's gotten so bad, that these people act just like Sodom and Gomorrah. What did God do to Sodom and Gomorrah? Fire and brimstone. Wiped them from the face of the planet. And yet that's exactly what's going on here. And so he's trying to get, this Levite is trying to get the rest of Israel to wake up and say, look, this can't be. This is not how it ought to be. This is not how it ought to be at all. Yeah. We're nearing the point. We've already gone to the point. They've already done that. Now the car is getting out of control. And if you've ever been on one of these slippery streets in Michigan and your car gets out of control, there's not a whole lot you can do. You can do this thing with the, what is that thing called? Wheel things. All right? And you can step on the brake. And yeah, that's best to just throw out the anchor, because it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. It's hard to read this. It's hard not to read this as an analogy. Did all these things happen? Absolutely. But what is God trying to tell the people? God is trying to tell the people they need to change their ways. I remember back when I was a kid, we say, oh, that is so terrible. Oh, that is so bad. Oh, we would never let that happen to us. I remember back in the 1960s. In the 1960s, I'm going to sound like an old man right now. In the 1960s, Lucy and Desi Arnaz, when they filmed their bedroom, had two separate beds. Now they had little Ricky, so at some point they pushed the beds together. But on TV, it was two separate beds, even though it was a married couple. Because the morality of the time said we can't show even a married couple in the bed together. That was the morality at the time. Within my lifetime, I was born in 1960. Within my lifetime, we have gone from that to every kind of perversion you can possibly imagine, with the exception of maybe one or two, is shown on TV on a regular basis. And no. You don't have to go to cable TV for this. You don't go to cable TV, it's on network TV. You don't got to go to Netflix or one of those channels for that. It's on network TV. A little bit of sin leads to a little bit more sin, which leads to a little bit more sin, until we get over there to the brink of no return. And the writer of Judges here is trying to get folks to wake up and see what's going on. Look how bad it's gotten. It's gotten so bad. And obviously, we don't have it in the text. I would think he sent a note. You just didn't get a piece of arm with you, and what is this? The Levite chases her concubine back and reconciles with her. Again, it's hard not to see Israel and God in that situation. Because how many times did Israel go off and play the harlot, and how many times did God go off and grab them back?
16 times.
A lot of times. How many times? How many times did God call him to come back to do the right thing. How many times did Israel come back and say, okay, we're good, we'll follow you, Lord, we'll do good for a little bit, and how many times did they run off again? I don't know if y'all remember that old song, it's a country song. She's the queen of my double wide trailer. I kept thinking about that, because she kept running off. And then again, when they were there with the father-in-law, everything was fine. When they stayed with the father-in-law, but they just had to get going. They had to get going. It's almost like, again, it's almost as if we just can't stop from rushing into evil. We just can't stop from rushing into evil. We got to go back, and we got to do more things. The last words of chapter 19 are unique. Rarely does the writer address the reader directly. Look what he says in the last words of chapter 19. Normally, the writer, when he's writing this down, just tells us the story. He doesn't put his comments in the story. I was searching through Judges to try to find another place he did it, and I couldn't find another place. But at this time, the writer puts down something special. He says, consider it, confer, and speak up. My King James says, take it, consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds. The impression I get is that he's calling us and them to action. Don't let it just blindly go by. Don't let it just blindly go by. When we get to chapters 20 and 21, we're going to see the residual effects that this has and the consequences of this particular action and this particular chapter. And so that's where we're going to leave it at today. Any questions or thoughts before we end the chapter? Yes, sir. There are no heroes. Yes. Yeah. The people that gave the concubine up are just as guilty as the one that took him. That's right. Yeah. There are no heroes in that one. And I'm telling you, like I said at the beginning of the class, this was a tough chapter to read. When you think about somebody cutting up bodies, I mean, we call those people serial killers. Usually do that kind of stuff. Either that or they work in a morgue. And my wife worked in a morgue, and y'all know that, and it takes a special mentality to work in a morgue. I'm telling you, it takes something, and then to do it to somebody you love or allegedly loved.
To me, Cody, this is like a sci-fi film that the hero's already dead.
Yeah. So, all right, any other thoughts before we end today? All right, thank you. May God bless you in your continued studies. Read chapter 20.